welcome everyone to another community call of this amazing gig community. Today is another very special community call where we celebrate vision storytelling. We have with us one of the all-time gig members, Paweł from Poland. Paweł today is going to speak to us about Solarpunk visions for makerspaces for our community. How can we tell stories that can make the world work differently or entice the world to work differently? How do we share our values, this beautiful world that we live in and understand very well, like this imaginary world that we are seeking and working towards as gig members? We understand it within us very well. We're able to communicate this so nicely between us because we come from the same place. We share the same visions. We share the same values. But how can we make this more comprehensible to a wider public, perhaps, and to have people join this world easier and have them join the movement to make it a movement for real. So this is what Paweł is very much interested in telling us about, and we are so excited to hear more about him. And Paweł, just for those who don't know what Solarpunk is, could you also explain to us what you mean by Solarpunk when you say Solarpunk?
Absolutely. I have a few slides because I would like to explain that visually. So I shall share my screen. Oh, I cannot share my screen only. Okay, now I can. So just a second. Uh, can you see my screen? Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Awesome. Thank you. So, yes, this is me. I'm Paweł, based in Poland. I've been with Geek for actually 10 years this year. And I'm generally a programmer, a hacker, as in open source, open hardware person, activist, and educator. But you may also know me as the geek photographer from a lot of Republicas, and I love taking photos of everyone. But at the same time, I realized that even though the photos are great documentation of what we are doing, not everyone sees what we see on those photos. And especially when we are organizing workshops, especially as we are organizing different events, what we see as, hey, we are showing the projects we are bringing to Berlin from all over the world. People don't fully understand the projects. And because I've been working with hackerspaces and makerspaces for actually almost 14 years now, I realized that even the notion of working on some technology together, on seeing a community create a technology, is extremely unintuitive for a lot of people. And I put more than 8 years of work in trying to explain it, trying to communicate to people that yes, we can modify technology. Yes, we can do it together. We can change technology to fit the needs of our community. But this is hard even when it's coming from Europe and US. And most people expect that technology will come only from Europe and US. If you try to tell a story of technology coming from anywhere in the global south, it is extremely hard to imagine for people. Uh, Even more so if we would like to try imagining a future created somewhere outside of Europe or US, where a lot of what we see is either a copy paste of this is futuristic New York, but it's actually Nairobi, or anything like that, or we see some pretty orientalist and exotic takes. And we don't have space where somebody could imagine a future for their own culture, for their own region, and actually tell others about it, how they see it. We see that a lot of voices about how our futures will look like are coming from the West. Even more so when we are talking about climate change and a lot of challenges and disasters that we will face all around the world, it is really hard to imagine how we can adjust, how we can change how our infrastructure works, how our civilization works, so that we can respond to them if you're not sitting in some boardroom in Europe or US. And this is something very interesting for me because as I work with a lot of educators, I find that vast majority of them paint the global south as having absolutely no agency in talking about climate, as having no say and no choice. Even if we would like to give it to people, they just cannot imagine this. And there's a way to actually uh, combat this. I will skip some slides, but I realized that we need a new language to tell stories of gig, to tell stories of our futures that we imagine for ourselves. And this language needs to be able to tell fictional stories in order to make the actual realist stories realistic. Because without that, we just won't be able to acknowledge what is really happening. And I came to it, to this realization uh, also around 10 years ago, where Afrofuturism. Afrofuturism is something really interesting because I realized that Afrofuturism is more about the futures imagined by Black Americans than by Africans. And there is a separate genre called African futurism, which is exploring how different cultures, how different nations within Africa can grow, and not only imagining some kind of magical Atlantis called Wakanda or however, which is that romanticized homeland of Americans looking for their ancestry. And just to give you an idea, a story that I ran into about 9 years ago. There was an Ebola crisis in Western Africa in 2014. And I will oversimplify a few things, but the whole region had a huge infrastructural problem because with the lethality rate, I think above 60%, a lot of people who had the means fled. And a lot of people who had the means were the people who were working around the infrastructure. So a lot of the internet infrastructure, a lot of the banking infrastructure of those countries stopped being maintained and just failed. And as the UN and WHO sent a lot of help in form of actual doctors, nurses, medical workers, but also medication, they would not send the medication and food as containers. They would send money to buy it. But without a working banking system, you cannot do this. So a lot of the hospitals in the region, especially in Sierra Leone, started failing. There was no food in the hospitals. There was no money to pay the medical workers, and it was really grim. But three local technologists actually approached the UN and proposed that they can rewrite the local banking system using open source so that they can create some provisional infrastructure until everything is back to normal. And there was a group, I think that was more than 20 people, but working with IDT Labs under Salton Masali, Harold Maksaidu, and Francis Bangwara, who within 2 weeks managed to rewrite the banking system using technology similar to M-Pesa and a lot of open source to actually keep working so that the doctors could be paid, the medical workers could be paid, and it was possible to just keep functioning. And eventually, Ebola was fought off. But this story is so out there. It's such a Hollywood movie action story because you can run it as a movie like a zombie apocalypse that is actually fought off. But it's so impossible to imagine that this was done in sub-Saharan Africa that most people that I approach with this story, having contacts to people, having like actual documents and showing them what happened, most writers, most reporters just refused to run it. And eventually, the members of IDT Labs got recognition as they got a responsible business award for essentially saving their country. And at least in my dictionary, that is a little more than being just a responsible business. And I realized that our language, what we are using now, is telling us that, like, most we can do when it comes to agency, most we can do when it comes to creating technology and taking control of our lives, is being entrepreneurial, is being locked within the capitalist system. And we cannot really talk about communities, about working together. And I realized even more, we need a new language. We need a language that will allow us to understand that, that will allow us to tell those stories. And I actually ran into such a language where, through both fictional and realist stories, we can start uh, telling people what are our values. And that language is solarpunk. This is a genre of fiction, of art, but also of activism, trying to imagine how we can, how our future can be if we acknowledge all of the problems we have, if we acknowledge all of the climate problems, and instead of saying, oh, we will have some magical nano robots that will fix everything and we will continue building the skyscrapers, we can actually imagine what will be the changes we will make and how our technology, how our cultures and civilization can change so that we can live differently. Uh, it's very communal. It's focused on local futures, not only as there will be, like, not as there will be no globalism, but every culture choosing how they want to adjust, every culture choosing what will they need within their own bioregion, when we know that there will be no copy paste solution that will work the same way in Brazil, in Poland, and in Malaysia, but giving people the opportunity to tell those their stories. And what I really love about Solarpunk, it builds in the maker spaces, the maker movement, and the library economy. This is one of the illustrations from one of my friends, the Lemonot, uh, who created a vision of a maker space to really show what those spaces are about, how creating technology is something we can culturally describe, because it's something that it's so far away of most culture today that you need to have a special kind of superhero to interface with technology, because we cannot imagine a group of scientists, of engineers, of people working together to modify things, to repair things, to adjust the technology for what they need as a community. And as I said, it imagines non-Western futures. It imagines futures which can be uh, told from all over the world and which don't need to fit the same format. And there are people who are currently working on it. There are people who are currently trying to find what stories we can tell, slash, how to tell those stories. And it got to a really interesting situation where, just after Republica this year, we had a session about Solarpunk at Republica, where I told everyone about, yes, we can tell our geek stories using this genre, using this kind of art. We can explain our values, but how can we find artists who will do that? 2 weeks later, I had a workshop with published artists where they were, yes, we want to tell all those stories, but they seem so utopian and so out there. I cannot imagine that there's anything like this happening in real life. So this is exactly what I want to propose, but a few more slides, because uh, the same way we can talk about our futures, we can imagine how we can adjust to climate change, what we can do. So it's not only, oh, we will all start using solar panels, but they need to be solar panels imported from one of the superpowers, and you need to be controlled by a superpower, and we will actually also mine a lot of your resources, so you have no say in this. But we can imagine how locally we can change things. I can tell more about the movement later if you want, but uh, what is probably the most important for me, this is something where we need our voices. This needs human voices. This is not something that will up grow out of the culture that is there, because it needs some input. And you will see that if you Google Solarpunk, you will see a lot of attempts at creating something with artificial intelligence, and you will see this is extremely clumsy. This is just copying skyscrapers with some trees and extremely clumsy, am I having a stroke graphics, where writing is as confusing as those visuals, where we really need our voices and we need this intentional human approach to be able to share the values. And what I wanted to show you most importantly is the project that took me a few months this year to coordinate, but this is really an effect of work of a lot of artists throughout the years. The Story Seed Library is a repository of solar punk art and climate art from all over the world, over 100 free to use Creative Commons illustrations from over 20 artists, and we are currently translating it to a lot of languages. So the base is in English, but we also have Spanish, Ukrainian, Polish, Italian, French. We will soon have Tigrinya and Hindi, and we want this to be available to people. If you want to see how it looks like, uh, can you still see my screen? If I can
Yes.
get a thumbs up, awesome, thank you. So the Story Seed Library will give you this intro. We want this to be down to earth. We want this to be based on real stories, and we want this to be highly symbolic. So this is one of the best illustrations, I think, for that, showing this hope for the future and the transition, even though it's pretty Western as the Western problem of what will happen to the miners. But you will see that there is art and there are story seeds, and in the art we have a lot of illustrations from a lot of artists, and you can see that you have very, very different tags. So for example, you can see everything about education, you can see everything that is about water, and you can look for illustrations and use it to explain your own projects, use it to illustrate anything. So if you want makerspaces, there will be makerspaces. Uh, if you want, for example, I really like this piece from the Lemonade. This is a vision of a community center which has a wall shared between one sub-Saharan community center and one Eastern European community center, with the dance workshops happening in both of them. So visions like this, showing people like what could there be, what can we imagine, is something that we can really use. And coming back to the last few slides, uh, we are already starting to work with Apropedia to start talking about the real projects that are out there with Apropedia. We'll probably start with illustrating some things about open flexure. So you can see we're already getting there to make a story which would explain everything, not only in very dry way of, hey, this is an educational project kids now we will learn about, but something that really shows the agency that is brought by this. And we need your stories. We need stories from Gig. We need stories that we can share, that we can actually share with the artists so that they can forge a new language. And I do believe that those stories will help bring the values that we have as Gig further in the world, and they will help to explain and get more people interested in this, especially as people feel this complete lack of agency, complete lack of anything that they could do, because everything is just so impossible to affect with their own work. This is what we can offer them. And just finishing, uh, if you want to contact me, I will leave my email and all the information. I will send the links to the slides and so on. And question, would you like to share any of your stories? Would you like me to talk more about the movement? Uh, what would you like me to do?
Thank you, Paul. This has been really nice just watching. Very entertaining as well.
Thank you.
So we have questions from the audience. Anything from what you've heard to the concept of solar punk to why you're here today?
If not, I can tell you some more because I usually get this question like, what what stories are there already within Solarpunk? And this is interesting because we have stories from a lot of places, but I find that few of them are like are something that really align with our values. A lot of them are attempts at what we can say. Can you still see my screen? Awesome.
Yes.
So there are three books that I really recommend. You may know Cory Doctorow. Or Cory Doctorow does a lot around open source, open hardware. He also writes extremely enthusiastically about technology, which may turn some people off, but Walk Away is really interesting. But there are also two interesting books, A Game Changer by Alex Beckett and A Half-Built Garden by Rutanna Emrys. And both of them imagine a world after some big turmoil in which there was a major upheaval, but we are starting to fight off the effects of climate change, and we want to we want to explore what processes can there be, what can we done so that so that we don't repeat the same mistakes. And a lot of Solarpunk books will have those proposals, which may not be the best idea, but they invite us to explore. For example, Game Changer says, okay, so after Facebook, after all the social media, there is very little privacy. And anybody who lived through Facebook and social media has most of their data already out. So should we expect the privacy to come back? Or should we rather expect that there should be also no privacy for the institutions and the governments? And it explores what happens with that when everybody has access to everything, and we can actually control what is happening worldwide by being those auditors and having accesses. Half-Built Garden is very interesting from another side because it's actually a story about aliens, and it starts by the first contact by actually a mother at the riverbank who was just checking the environmental sensors, making the first contact with aliens who come and say, hey, people of Earth, we see that you have huge problems with climate change. We came here to save you. And she responds, well, actually, 100 years ago, we could have gone with that, but we're doing better and better. And it's an exploration of what have we done and what could be done. So this is really interesting. And if you would like to see some more sources, the Storyseed library, I will send the link in the chat in a moment. We have some essays, we have the manifestos here, but it's the hub that I'm trying to coordinate in multiple languages. On YouTube, there's a great YouTuber from Trinidad and Tobago, Andrewism, who has great essays of how can we work differently, especially with this grassroots approach. And we have a podcast for the writers, Solarpunk Prompts, where we offer some stories of what can we try to imagine and what stories can be written with a lot of research and context to people who often lived through them, so that a writer can imagine something. And I will give you the link to the Storyseed library here. But yeah, uh, do you have any questions? Because I'm absolutely open for those.
Ugo, do you it's good to have you, first of all. I don't know, I felt like for a moment there you wanted to ask something.
Yeah, hi. Hi
Okay.
everyone. And thank you, Paweł. It's super interesting. It's more kind of a reflection, or rather just share some reaction. Um, so first of all, some of this obviously resonates with the kind of ethos of the repair movement, as in this kind of DIY approach, kind of very um, low on the amount of resources, and in a sense, kind of imagining a future that might not necessarily be grand like the ones that are created by AI prompts when thinking about futures, but more like a future by way of removing the things that have gone wrong and that shouldn't have existed to begin with. And so, in a way, recently I've been paying more attention, and you mentioned Apropedia. And so, in parallel, I've been exposed a little bit to the low tech movement in France, and it might be in other countries as well. But I visited one festival of this movement in France, and I was really excited to see how the kind of innovations there are frugal in the sense of not requiring some crazy tech, but obviously being low tech, seem to kind of build, for me at least, like kind of a mosaic of futures that are more appealing but also more tangible than many of the kind of crazy futures that spiral out of control. So, in a way, it feels like there is a connection between the solarpunk ethos and the hands-on maker approach, but when it tries to make something that is very relatable, kind of green by design, but also participatory and accessible. And so, in a sense, it also connects with some of the visions that are shared by those that are trying to, well, badly reappropriate, what is a future of a rural or semi-rural Kenyan area, but actually keeping it real and actually trying to readapt in a southern perspective brought to a northern reality and vice versa in a way that doesn't steal but actually contributes to rethinking um, futures. So that's what I'm thinking about, which might not be exactly what you were looking after, but I think there's something there that could represent, yeah, our future reaction to it.
I absolutely agree. And the right to repair movement is something which I see extremely aligned with Solarpunk. But also, I realize with right to repair and with the hacker movement, we are missing like the consequences of those in the futures we imagine. And this is something that I noticed when I tried to tell people about hackerspaces and makerspaces even a decade ago, that as we imagine a future, the engineers who are really deep into the repair movement, the do it yourself, and so on, they don't know how to tell a story. So, for example, a story that I would see having worked with a lot of writers and also being an engineer is okay, if we have repairable electronics, what new stories which are deeply personal can we tell about them? If we have laptops that can survive more than 20 years, how does it look like when you find your grandma's old laptop or you inherit your grandma's old laptop and it's not something like today, like you, this is so old, this is so unusable, but you essentially treat it as a journal or showing grandma's last 2 decades. And like, for me, this is a little random, but imagine going through grandma's downloads folder for the last 20 years and all of the mess that was there. And imagining how those stories can happen, how stories of disability and working with prosthetics, because we have a lot of people being invisible with their disabilities, relying on prosthetics. And the only narratives we have for them is some cyberpunk shiny chrome. But imagine if we make prosthetics modifiable so that they can do what they want. We are pretty far away from having like a fully functional prosthetic hand that will be the same as an organic hand. But I know some people who are actually like who have a limb difference and who are missing one hand. They would like to have a lot of add-ons to their prosthetics, which are not only 3D printed, which need a little more work to be, for example, molded, and they would like, for example, a part they could use to exercise and to do yoga with. So they just need a rubber ball essentially at the end. But this is something where you need the disabled people to have the understanding that they can approach someone. You need to have a space that will be ready to receive them, and we need a project like the Caribals that we have to welcome them into it. And the same way, I am seeing so much innovation, but I don't want to say innovation in terms of capitalist innovation. I see so much interesting technology adjusting to the needs of people, like even the sub-Saharan mobile payment systems, where like not only for me engineering is fascinating because hey, you are able to essentially run PayPal on GSM. Like this is magical, how little energy you need for that. But also, you have technology which enables your social structure. So you have the chamas, you have the neighborhood clubs where neighbors support each other and they have circles essentially sending money to each neighbor every week. We can do a lot with that by just giving people the voice. But I do not think that currently a lot of people know that those are stories that could be told. And I think like we need this connection between artists and between engineers also from gig. And I want to be at least the connector introducing people, but also helping us find the stories. Because if we come up with the maker movement right to repair, this is something that directly translates to you have more agency, you can have impact on things, you can help others, you can have what you are missing, and there are emergent stories coming out of it. But there are very few writers who will notice that, and there needs to be this connection, and especially connection from a culture which is so different from where a lot of the writers are from. Because a very sad thing, also semi relating to what Ricardo is writing, something I found out a lot about a lot of Western publishers publishing global South stories. They expect stories about essentially what was already there. So a lot of publishers will only print poverty porn from sub-Saharan Africa. This story needs to show that there are people who lack agency, who are locked in either poverty or some kind of problem, and only through some singular ingenuity or some external force this can be overcome. But if you show a group of people, especially a community, trying to help with this like very grassroots way, the publisher gets confused and is less likely to publish a story. So at the same time as making connections, I am looking for what will be the ways to showcase them. And this is one of the projects I also have, trying to look where we can share those stories. But yeah, I hope that I was at least semi on topic.
Yes, thank you, Pavel. I think that was one of part of my question, how to spread the idea further. Uh, But also came into my mind, and perhaps you can share the video on screen because we are recorded so people can see the video I share it, but also an idea of how can we also incorporate this post Blade Runner global south future, because what I can see on these videos and what I can see with some youth around the global south is a kind of post Blade Runner, but very intense. I would say it's an intense
Yes.
Blade Runner, without computers, but with rats. So how do you think not we, but how do we think these futures can be incorporated together, So what you see in the video I share in the chat is
Yeah,
that
I can.
people are
I can.
becoming not afraid of rats and the kind of sickness it provoke and this kind of thing, they are dancing in the sewage drain,
Yeah.
it's so how do you think these futures can interconnect somehow and because most of the pictures we see are nice things happening, and this is a nice thing happening as well, people dancing in the sewage is just completely surreal,
Yeah.
So how do you believe these futures can mix, and how do you think it can be the idea of creating a different future can be spread?
Hmm. So for me, there are several parts to it. I will start with the future is now just unevenly distributed. But like with this famous quote, I think it's worthwhile to see futures as perspectives on today extrapolated, and we are only extrapolating very particular things. And I may be biased here, but to understand a lot of this, to understand those videos, I see that we have huge need for two things: agency and transgression. And when I see people dancing in the sewage, trying to make it so that they are showing something, I see this need to show that, hey, I can have impact on my life, I can show something, and this unexpectedness and transgression. And what are the values that they are actually showing? I do not think that me as a reader from Europe will see the same thing that they want to express. I would expect that this is a kind of transgression, but I do not think that we need to get post that. I think we need to get to what they want to express and to give them an outlet, both practical outlet of what can you do not to have sewage in your community uncovered, but outlet to express those needs. If they need to feel that they have uh, the impact, the agency to change something in their lives, and if they need to show that they differ, they transgress, they rebel against the systems that are locking them in their current situations, what are the other outlets to do that? I see that, for example, in India, we have a lot of similar TikToks. I'm not a TikTok expert, but I see that there are TikToks of, for example, cleaning old places, cleaning old temples, cleaning beaches, cleaning a lot of places. And as itself, cleaning will not do much because this is a symbol, but after some time, we'll need to clean this place again. But how can we form communities and like communal structure where we actually care about what is around us? How can we create those places, like those structures where we make sure that some part of infrastructure around us works, where something is clean? Because as we will be getting uh, like deeper and deeper in climate change, we'll need to realize that infrastructures are things that we need uh, to collectively maintain. And for me, this is pretty important that we don't just say, oh, the government will take care of it, the state will do something, but we need to be involved. And if we want the structure of the government to do something, we need to put pressure. We need to say we do not want an open switch going through our community. We need to do something with it. If we want to have a really resilient electric networks, we need to get involved in it. And in order to be able to do that, we need to imagine that this is possible, and we need to have examples. And I would absolutely love an anthology of Solarpunk stories focusing on real projects of bringing the infrastructure to a given region, of fixing the infrastructure communally. Because there's this problem. Like in the West, if you ask an average American to write Solarpunk, they will come up with their romanticized version of their idea for a better future. And this will be like homesteading, living off grid, which is all nice and cool, but you have like $500,000 on your account. You can afford a lot of things, and you can buy a farm and like live sustainably and so on and so forth, because if you need, you can offload a lot of your needs somewhere else. But if we are talking Brazilian favela, if we are talking about people who live next to an open sewage, they like this is a very different story. And if you show just the aesthetics of it to a writer who is not ready to share this story, the writer will get so shocked that they will give you the story of how impossibly sad it is, instead of what can we do. That's why I'm trying to analyze it. What are the needs? What are the people trying to express? And I know I will not have answers, but I can try translating. So this is what I see in Solarpunk. This, like, we will have a language to start translating to understand each other. And I do not think we need to be both. I think we need to offer a way different than what is currently there. Did I get all of your points, or is there anything else I should?
No, totally, and I was reflecting, for example, how can we got those people, youth from the favela, from Balkans, whatever, to write their futures in their perspectives, and saying, look, we need a better place to dance, or we want to dance like this,
Yeah.
and this is what the future will look like. Everyone dancing on the
Mhm.
sewage. Yes, Niels knows Recife
Yeah.
probably, so Recife is the
Yeah.
most crazy place on earth, people. Go, Niels.
Yes.
No, it's sorry. I've been distracted with preparing food for my daughter a bit, but it's a really fascinating conversation. And taking what Pavel is sharing, maybe to a pragmatic point of view. So I don't know. How about for next year, for instance, Republica, to think of how to create as part of the makerspace, like a glimpse of those or of those futures. Also, like I don't know, a small exhibition, or we try to capture like those futures in the work that we are doing. And I don't know, in my case with community networks in the global south, it is exactly about this kind of reimagining networking, not as a big telco attempt or something like this. So maybe we can try to build those aesthetic bridge together. Yeah, that's my.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually like, finally, I found a few artists who are absolutely into it and who understand this, where I need to do minimal translation layer, because this is quite a challenge to find an artist like capable and willing to do that. And I would absolutely love to do it. I would also love to come with already a few illustrations for existing Apropedia projects. Also, an illustration or a small comic explaining Apropedia, explaining open hardware, because I find that this is something which is pretty hard to explain. A few years back, I actually co-created a story. Let me just share my screen again. I co-created a story which was to explain hackers. It's the page is called Glider Inc., and it's essentially a story of a disabled hacker who wants to create her own accessibility technology, which is not a prosthetic as everybody wants to give her, but instead she wants to create a camera which would work directly with her hand as it is. And like I think I learned how to communicate some things, but we can communicate it in context specifically of communal technology, of things we can bring without asking governments and big organizations to help. And just to answer Ricardo's second part, what can we do to get youth interested? The other part of the story seed library, and why it's a library and not a gallery, are the story seeds. Because I worked pretty extensively with Polish youth, trying to get them to imagine those climate futures. And I realized that they lack the tools to tell the stories in which they have agency, where they will often repeat stories of superheroes just slightly tweaked. So, this is about sustainability. And together with quite a few people, we wrote down the story seeds, the writing prompts, how to start a story uh, within such future in which there's always a community, there's agency, there is some traction, like there's some tension, there's some conflict. And for example, like the community center, a community center library or educational hub initially set up to help people like coal miners to respecialize and find other jobs, has now become a place of unofficial pilgrimages of people striving to find their role in life and learn history from those who lived it. So this is a story, it starts with the problem we have right now, but we are describing like the narrative of how we can learn from those lessons of people dealing with the lack of meaning when they lost their jobs, and how they found themselves anew, and how we can repeat that. So we have a lot of seeds, some of them illustrated, some of them more down to earth, some of them uh, more ambitious. And I like the great infrastructural project as well. There's a small rural town next to whom a great infrastructural project was built. It was a dam or a huge solar and wind power plant or a gravitational battery, etc. Over time, the corporations and the government forgot about them, and in order to avoid a catastrophe, they need to work with unusual driven activists who come from all over to help them. So for me, this is a story which invites people to be like, imagine there's a huge project that your community is forced to maintain just for their safety, and how can you like tell a story of your role in it. uh, uh, Neil said it might be also a language to work on the ecological anxiety of young people. Absolutely. And what I find, like for me, the ecological anxiety is connected to agency, because when you have like the anxiety comes from the fear that you can do nothing about. And the moment you feel that you can do something, even if it's bigger than you, but there is a plan, you can start managing the anxiety. You can feel that you are doing something. And Ricardo said this can be a huge inspiration source. I do not know what it is. I hope it's not a Rickroll. Okay, video nas aldeias. Mm.
This is of indigenous community that
Mhm.
produce their own movies since the 80s, and have a very different styles of narratives and heroes
Nice.
and stories completely different from the Western world.
I realized that there is a lot of such work on different narratives from Brazil, but I find that a lot of interesting stuff happening with narratives in the South America is not being exported outside. And this is for me very interesting, because there was even an excellent Solarpunk like climate series from Argentina, El Futuro Impossible. Uh, let me. So there is this series, which is only in Spanish, and it's not available in English. And it is absolutely wonderful, and I really recommend it to anyone who would like to work on it, like to work within the topic. But like maybe the translation will be created later. So with this, there's my question: do we have some English subtitle for this, or is it only in Portuguese?
This has English subtitles, and they are not even Portuguese. Most of the movies they are in the traditional language from the indigenous community, but most of them they have subtitles. So it's in a way to go. But that's one thing I would say, especially in the case of the Latin America, language is a huge barrier, and even
Yeah,
indigenous language, because it's nowadays are around 180 languages in Brazil.
yeah, yeah. But okay, so I will take a look at those because this may be really interesting. But I see huge potential in Brazilian narratives because I already saw some of those being incorporated in narratives coming from Brazil. I just don't know how to properly share them because one of the one of my biggest problems when working on any indigenous I don't want to say content, working with any indigenous tropes and themes is that we have a very specific tracks in culture. Like imagine that you have a track in the road where so many vehicles went through it that you automatically fall into those specific paths, and it's really hard to get something and tell a story which doesn't automatically fall into a path, because the moment you start telling an indigenous story, it's like it becomes safe and ignorable because of the US values. It becomes more about identity and not about the actual values those people are trying to show you. And this is something that for me is really tricky. But yes, we can do quite a lot with it. For me, a good example of this, there is one American game called Coyote and Crow, which is made by Native Americans, believe between US and Canada, but don't remember the details. They imagined a world in the game where the Americas were never colonized. And with all the political turmoil of pre-Columbian times, the cultures went in a very different direction. But for whatever reason, they put a really problematic theme for me because they wanted this world to have similar technology to ours. And instead of like rebuilding the technology that would fit the needs of the communities and cultures, which just evolved differently and wanted to live differently, they decided to introduce some magical drug which made people super intelligent, and then they created modern technology, even though modern technology comes from extremely different cultural expectations. So for me it is a very different choice because they almost created something which would be extremely worthwhile in seeing how other people think, but in the end they ended not doing that. And this translation layer to like how to tell stories of different values, even though even though we want it to be approachable, this is really hard when translating any native culture to the current language for me.
Yeah, totally. And perhaps this is a special point, just like you said, around South America. If you grab like indigenous from the Andes, or some place from the
Yes.
Amazon forest, because the connection to the Western society is very low, and so you don't have the reference of the Western society, and this can bring more creative things to the top, right? And the
Yes.
same thing with Australia Aborigines.
Yeah, just how to translate it so that it doesn't become exoticized and orientalized. Because if you orientalize it, like I think there are some approach. I really liked David Graeber and David Wengrow's "The Dawn of Everything." They really tried to look into how different pre-Columbian cultures in both Americas, how they related to each other and analyze their values. So I really appreciate that view. But myself, I know so little that I don't want to say much outside of the fact that if anybody would be interested in Solarpunk, I really welcome them. And maybe if you want to see, there's also something called Amazon Futurism, which is not. Let me share my screen again. There's Amazon Futurism, which is created by this artist called Kieros. I haven't managed to invite him to the library yet, but I really like his works like this. This is not exactly solarpunk, but just imagining agroforestry in the Amazon, like the Amazonian River Delta is pretty superb to me. And I think this is something that we should be going for, imagining how different localized futures can be. But yeah, I think we are at time. So huge thank you, everyone. If anybody wants to contact me directly, I can share my email with you as well. And yeah, huge thank you. I hope to be able to maybe even propose a session or a workshop next Republica with Solarpunk and some actual interesting stories brought there. So let's see how it goes. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
I think you
Thank
muted,
you.
Fadia.
Bye. Thanks so much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye bye.
I cannot hear you, Fadia. I think you muted hardware wise. Thank you.